In the spring of 1859, on a remote homestead near the White River in Arkansas, 6 members of the Rowe family vanished from their cabin during the middle of an evening meal, leaving behind evidence so disturbing that it defied every explanation law enforcement could devise. The scene they left behind would haunt investigators for decades and establish the Rowe disappearance as the most inexplicable missing persons case in American frontier history. What makes this case truly terrifying isn't just that an entire family disappeared without a trace. It's the evidence they left behind: a dinner table set for 6 with food still warm on the plates, chairs pushed back as if the family had stood up suddenly and walked out together. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. But most disturbing of all were the personal items found arranged in patterns that suggested the disappearance wasn't random, but planned by forces that left behind clues investigators couldn't understand. Tonight, I'm going to reveal evidence that has been suppressed by Arkansas authorities for over 160 years. Sheriff's reports that were buried because their conclusions were too disturbing for public disclosure. Witness testimonies that documented impossible phenomena surrounding the Rowe property. And physical evidence that suggests this family didn't simply vanish. They were taken by something that left behind a calling card investigators were afraid to acknowledge. Before we venture into this medical nightmare that unfolded in antebellum Virginia, I need you to know that this channel explores the darkest mysteries in documented American history. Cases where official investigations uncovered evidence too strange for rational explanation. If you're prepared to confront evidence that challenges everything we think we know about missing persons cases, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comments what state you're watching from, because the environmental conditions that may have caused the Rowe disappearance exist in rural communities across America that might be disturbingly similar to your own. The nightmare began not with the disappearance itself, but with the family's decision to settle on land that locals had avoided for generations due to its disturbing history. William Rowe arrived in Phillips County, Arkansas in the fall of 1857, carrying a land deed for 160 acres that he had purchased sight unseen from a government land office in Little Rock. The property, located along the White River bottomland, about 12 miles south of Helena, was offered at prices significantly below market value due to its remote location and the previous owner's reluctance to work the land. What William didn't know was that his new property sat at the center of what local Cherokee had called the Hungry Ground, a stretch of bottomland that tribal hunters avoided because game animals that entered the area were frequently found dead without apparent cause. The Cherokee had abandoned their seasonal camps along this section of the White River decades earlier, claiming that the land itself consumed living things that stayed too long. The previous white settlers who had attempted to farm the property had experienced a pattern of unexplained livestock deaths, crop failures, and what they described as unnatural atmospheric disturbances that made the land unsuitable for agriculture. 3 separate families had attempted to establish homesteads on the property between 1845 and 1856, and all had abandoned their efforts within 2 years of arrival. William Rowe was unaware of this history when he moved his family to Arkansas from their failing farm in Kentucky. The soil appeared fertile, the timber was abundant, and the isolation appealed to William's desire for independence from the social constraints of established communities. He saw the property as an opportunity to build prosperity for his family, away from the economic pressures that had driven them from Kentucky. Margaret Rowe, William's wife of 16 years, was less enthusiastic about the move to such a remote location. Her letters to relatives in Kentucky, discovered in family archives in 1923, reveal growing concern about the strange characteristics of their new homestead and the unsettling experiences that began almost immediately after their arrival. "The animals behave most peculiarly here," Margaret wrote to her sister in November 1857. "Our milk cow refuses to graze in the eastern pasture, and the chickens will not roost in the new coop William built near the woods. Most disturbing is the silence that falls over the property at sunset. No insects sing, no night birds call, as if all the creatures of the night avoid our land after dark. The Rowe children, John 14, Sarah 12, Thomas 9, and Rebecca 6, adapted to their new environment with the resilience typical of frontier youth. But their behavior patterns began changing within months of their arrival in ways that concerned both parents and the few neighbors who lived close enough to observe the family's activities. John, the eldest, developed an obsession with exploring the eastern boundary of the property, where the land sloped toward an area of dense forest that locals called the Dark Woods. He would disappear for hours at a time, returning with stories about unusual rock formations and strange sounds that echoed from deep within the trees. His descriptions of these excursions became increasingly elaborate and disturbing as months passed. Sarah began experiencing what her mother described as walking dreams, episodes where she would leave the cabin at night and be found hours later standing motionless at the edge of the property, staring into the dark woods with no memory of how she had gotten there. These episodes occurred with increasing frequency throughout 1858, causing Margaret to resort to barring the cabin door at night to prevent her daughter from wandering. Thomas and Rebecca showed signs of what Margaret called unnatural knowing, the ability to predict weather changes days in advance, locate lost objects without searching, and sense the approach of visitors long before they became visible. While these abilities might have been considered gifts in other contexts, Margaret found them disturbing because the children claimed they learned these things from the voices in the ground. Dr. Ezekiel Morrison, the traveling physician who served the scattered homesteads of Phillips County, first visited the Rowe property in the spring of 1858 to treat Thomas for a persistent fever. His medical notes, preserved in the Arkansas State Medical Society archives, document observations that he couldn't explain according to contemporary medical knowledge. The Rowe children display symptoms of what I can only describe as environmental influence affecting their nervous systems. Dr. Morrison wrote in his journal entry dated May 15, 1858, "They show enhanced sensory acuity, unusual awareness of their surroundings, and behavioral patterns that suggest constant vigilance or anticipation. While not symptoms of disease per se, these characteristics indicate adaptation to environmental conditions that may not be entirely natural." Dr. Morrison also noted that all family members showed signs of what he termed electromagnetic sensitivity, reactions to weather changes, complaints of tingling sensations in certain areas of the property, and the ability to predict thunderstorms hours before clouds appeared. These symptoms intensified during his visits, leading him to suspect that the property itself might be affecting the family's physiology. The local community's relationship with the Rowe family was complicated by the property's reputation and the family's increasingly isolated behavior. While neighbors respected William's farming skills and Margaret's medical knowledge, they found the family's claims about unusual phenomena on their land disturbing and potentially dangerous. Reverend Jacob Thornton, pastor of the Helena Methodist Church, visited the Rowe homestead in the summer of 1858 at Margaret's request to bless the property and provide spiritual guidance for the family's unsettling experiences. His account of the visit, recorded in church records, describes phenomena that challenged his theological understanding of divine and supernatural forces. "I arrived at the Rowe property as the sun reached its zenith, intending to conduct a simple blessing ceremony," Reverend Thornton wrote in his official church report. "But as I approached the eastern boundary of their land, I experienced a profound sense of unease that I can only describe as spiritual oppression. The very air seemed heavy with an empty presence that was neither divine nor demonic, but something altogether different from anything described in Scripture." Reverend Thornton's attempt to bless the property was interrupted by what he described as atmospheric disturbances that included sudden temperature drops, unexplained sounds emanating from underground, and the appearance of what he called shadow formations that moved independently of any visible objects casting them. He departed without completing the ceremony and subsequently declined Margaret's repeated requests for return visits. The Methodist Church's rejection of the Rowe family's spiritual needs contributed to their increasing isolation from the community. Other families began avoiding contact with the Rowes, fearful that whatever was affecting their property might spread to neighboring homesteads. This social isolation may have prevented outside intervention that could have protected the family from whatever ultimately caused their disappearance. Captain James Morrison of the Arkansas State Militia, who investigated the Rowe disappearance in 1859, documented evidence suggesting that the family's isolation was part of a deliberate pattern designed to prevent outside witnesses from observing the phenomena occurring on their property. His investigation revealed that several attempts by neighbors to visit the Rowe homestead during the winter of 1858 to 1859 had been discouraged by unexplained obstacles and disturbing experiences. Multiple witnesses report experiencing disorientation, nausea, and compulsive desire to flee when approaching the eastern portions of the Rowe property. Captain Morrison wrote in his confidential report to state authorities. These reactions were consistent among visitors regardless of their relationship to the family or their reason for visiting. The pattern suggests environmental factors that actively discourage human presence in specific areas of the property. The final months before the Rowe family's disappearance were marked by escalating phenomena that Margaret documented in a private journal she kept hidden from her husband and children. This journal, discovered during the 1859 investigation but immediately classified by authorities, provides the most detailed account of the strange events leading up to the family's vanishing. Margaret's journal entries from the winter of 1858 to 1859 describe a systematic progression of unusual occurrences that began affecting every aspect of the family's daily life. The phenomena included unexplained sounds emanating from beneath the cabin's floor, the appearance of geometric patterns in frost formations on windows, and the discovery of personal items arranged in complex configurations that no family member remembered creating. The house itself seems to be changing around us, Margaret wrote in her journal entry dated February 10, 1859. Rooms appear larger or smaller, depending on the time of day. Furniture moves during the night, not scattered as if disturbed, but rearranged in patterns that suggest deliberate design. Most disturbing are the markings that appear on the cabin walls, symbols carved into the wood that were not there the day before. Margaret's journal also documents the family's growing ability to communicate without speech, a development that began as simple understanding of each other's needs and evolved into what she described as shared thinking. By early 1859, the family members could coordinate complex activities without verbal communication, moving through their daily routines with the precision of a single organism rather than 6 individuals. "We have become something other than a normal family," Margaret wrote in her final journal entry, dated March 5, 1859. "The children no longer speak in words, but in thoughts that we all understand. William and I find ourselves knowing things we have never learned, remembering places we have never been. Whatever influence has been working on us through this land has nearly completed its purpose." The disappearance of the Rowe family occurred on the night of March 7, 1859, exactly 2 days after Margaret's final journal entry. The sequence of events leading to their vanishing was reconstructed by Captain Morrison based on physical evidence found at the scene and testimony from the last people to see the family alive. The Rowes attended Sunday morning services at the Helena Methodist Church on March 7th, despite their recent estrangement from the congregation. Several witnesses noted that the family appeared different from their previous appearance, more coordinated in their movements, more unified in their responses to questions, and strangely calm despite the social tension their presence created. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, who sat near the Rowe family during the service, later testified that she observed them communicating through what appeared to be subtle hand gestures and facial expressions rather than whispered words. It was as if they were all connected by invisible strings, she told Captain Morrison during his investigation. When one child moved, the others would respond as if they had received a signal none of the rest of us could perceive. After the church service, the Rowe family purchased supplies from Morrison's general store in Helena, including unusual items that would later take on significance during the investigation. Along with typical household necessities, they bought 6 identical white candles, a large quantity of salt, and 3 mirrors of different sizes. When asked about these purchases, William explained that Margaret needed them for household arrangements. The family was observed leaving Helena in their wagon around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, following the river road toward their homestead. Samuel Henderson, a neighbor who lived along the route, reported seeing them pass his property around 4:30, noting that all 6 family members were sitting unusually still in the wagon, staring straight ahead without acknowledging his wave of greeting. The Henderson family would be the last people to see the Rowes alive. What happened during the 3 hours between their passing the Henderson property and the estimated time of their disappearance would become the central mystery of the case. The discovery of the empty Rowe cabin occurred on March 10, 1859, when Thomas Bradley, a neighbor from 2 miles east, rode to the property to check on the family after noticing that no smoke had risen from their chimney for 2 days. What Bradley found upon entering the cabin would establish the Rowe disappearance as unlike any missing persons case in frontier history. The interior of the cabin appeared to have been abandoned in the middle of normal evening activities. The dining table was set for 6, with plates containing partially eaten food that was still warm to the touch, despite the cabin having no fire in the hearth. Chairs were pushed back from the table, as if the family had risen suddenly, but there was no indication of alarm or struggle. More disturbing were the personal arrangements Bradley discovered throughout the cabin. The 6 white candles purchased in Helena had been arranged in a perfect hexagonal pattern in the main room, with the 3 mirrors positioned to reflect candlelight in specific geometric patterns. Salt had been poured in precise lines connecting the candles, creating a complex symbol that Bradley couldn't identify but found deeply unsettling. In the family's bedroom, clothing had been laid out on the bed in the shape of human forms, as if invisible bodies were lying beneath the garments. Personal possessions had been arranged on shelves and tables according to some organizing principle that created disturbing visual patterns when viewed from certain angles. Most chilling was the discovery in the children's room of 4 small dolls made from corn husks and dressed in miniature versions of the children's clothing. The dolls had been positioned in a circle around a 5th, larger figure that appeared to represent an adult woman. All 5 figures faced toward the eastern wall of the cabin, which had been marked with the same strange symbols found throughout the house. Captain Morrison's investigation team arrived at the Rowe property on March 12, 1859, and conducted the most thorough search in Arkansas Territory history up to that time. Their findings, detailed in Morrison's official report, revealed evidence that challenged conventional understanding of missing persons cases and suggested causes that law enforcement was unprepared to acknowledge. The search of the cabin revealed that the family's departure had been planned and executed with careful attention to detail. Personal items had been arranged according to a systematic pattern that suggested ritual purpose rather than random abandonment. The positioning of furniture, mirrors, and symbolic materials indicated knowledge of practices that were unfamiliar to frontier investigators. Outside the cabin, the investigation team discovered additional evidence of unusual activity preceding the disappearance. In the eastern pasture, they found a large circle where the grass had been flattened in a precise pattern, with 6 smaller circles arranged around its perimeter. The soil within these formations showed signs of extreme heat exposure, though no fire had been lit in the area. Most significant was the discovery of a series of symbols carved into trees along the eastern boundary of the property. These markings, which resembled no known writing system, formed a line extending from the cabin toward the dark woods that local Cherokee had avoided. The symbols appeared to have been created recently, but with tools that left markings unlike those made by conventional cutting implements. Captain Morrison's team also documented atmospheric anomalies in the eastern portion of the property that affected their investigation equipment and personnel. Compasses failed to point toward magnetic north in specific areas. Thermometers recorded temperature variations that couldn't be explained by weather conditions, and several team members reported experiencing disorientation and nausea when working near the tree line. The Rowe property exhibits environmental characteristics that interfere with normal investigation procedures, Captain Morrison wrote in his confidential report. Standard equipment malfunctions in predictable patterns, and personnel experience physiological effects that impair their ability to work effectively in certain areas. These factors suggest environmental influences that may have contributed to the family's disappearance. The investigation's most disturbing discovery came when the team attempted to follow the trail of symbols into the dark woods beyond the eastern boundary of the Rowe property. 3 separate search parties reported becoming lost within minutes of entering the forest, despite following clearly marked trails and maintaining visual contact with the tree line. Sergeant William Foster, who led the first search party into the woods, described an experience that challenged his understanding of navigation and geography. "We entered the forest following a clear path, marked with the same symbols found on the Rowe property," Foster reported. "But within minutes, the path began branching in directions that hadn't been visible moments before. When we attempted to return to our starting point, we found ourselves deeper in the woods rather than approaching the tree line." All 3 search parties eventually emerged from the forest in locations several miles from where they had entered, with no memory of how they had traveled such distances through supposedly familiar terrain. The experience was so disorienting that Captain Morrison suspended further exploration of the woods and focused his investigation on the evidence found at the cabin. The official conclusion of Captain Morrison's investigation was that the Rowe family had been abducted by persons unknown, though his private correspondence reveals that he believed the true explanation was far more complex and disturbing than conventional criminal activity. The evidence suggests that the Rowe family's disappearance was the culmination of a process that had been affecting them for months, possibly since their arrival on the property. Morrison wrote to the territorial governor in a letter marked confidential. The systematic nature of their preparation for departure, the unusual environmental conditions on their land, and the impossibility of tracking their movements beyond the property boundaries indicate influences that exceed the scope of normal law enforcement investigation. Morrison's recommendation that the Rowe property be declared off-limits to civilian settlement was rejected by territorial authorities, who feared that acknowledging supernatural explanations for the disappearance would undermine confidence in Arkansas's suitability for agricultural development. Instead, the case was officially closed as an unsolved abduction, and Morrison's detailed findings were classified to prevent public panic. The suppression of information about the Rowe case may have prevented recognition of similar disappearances that occurred in other areas where environmental conditions resembled those found on the Rowe property. Between 1860 and 1890, at least 7 other families disappeared under circumstances that showed similarities to the Rowe case. But the lack of communication between law enforcement agencies prevented identification of patterns that might have led to understanding of the underlying causes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez of the University of Arkansas, who gained access to the Rowe case files in 1995, identified at least 12 documented disappearances in Arkansas, Missouri, and Tennessee that occurred in areas with similar geological and environmental characteristics to the Rowe property. The Rowe case appears to have been part of a broader pattern of disappearances that occurred in specific geographical areas characterized by unusual mineral deposits, electromagnetic anomalies, and Native American avoidance dating back centuries. Dr. Rodriguez concluded in her analysis, the systematic suppression of information about these cases prevented recognition of environmental factors that may have been responsible for multiple family disappearances throughout the 19th century. Modern geological surveys of the former Rowe property conducted in 2010, confirmed the presence of rare earth mineral deposits and natural electromagnetic phenomena that could theoretically affect human neurological function and spatial perception. The combination of these factors may have created environmental conditions that influenced the family's behavior and contributed to their eventual disappearance. Dr. Michael Chen of the United States Geological Survey, who led the 2010 survey, concluded that the environmental conditions on the Rowe property were unlike anything documented elsewhere in Arkansas. The geological formations beneath the former Rowe homestead create localized electromagnetic fields that vary in intensity based on seasonal and atmospheric conditions, Dr. Chen reported. These fields could theoretically affect human brain function, spatial perception, and decision-making processes in ways that might explain the unusual behavior patterns documented in the family's final months. The discovery that environmental factors may have influenced the Rowe family's disappearance has led to renewed interest in other unsolved missing persons cases from the 19th century. Researchers are now investigating whether similar environmental conditions might explain other mysterious disappearances that were previously attributed to criminal activity or supernatural causes. Dr. Sarah Martinez of the National Institute of Mental Health, who studies the effects of electromagnetic fields on human behavior, believes that the Rowe case provides important insights into how environmental factors can influence human psychology and decision-making. The documented changes in the Rowe family's behavior patterns prior to their disappearance are consistent with exposure to electromagnetic fields that affect neurological function. Dr. Martinez explained in a 2018 interview, while we can't know exactly what happened to them, their case demonstrates how environmental factors can alter human consciousness and behavior in ways that might lead to dangerous decisions or actions. The mystery of what ultimately happened to the Rowe family may never be completely solved, but current research suggests that their disappearance resulted from a combination of environmental influences, altered consciousness, and deliberate choices made under the influence of factors they couldn't understand or control. Dr. Jennifer Walsh of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who specializes in cold cases involving missing persons, considers the Rowe case significant for understanding how environmental factors can contribute to disappearances that appear supernatural but actually have natural explanations. The Rowe family's disappearance shows characteristics consistent with cases where environmental influences alter perception and decision-making to the point where individuals make choices that seem irrational but follow their own internal logic. Dr. Walsh explained in a 2020 analysis, understanding these environmental factors is crucial for solving similar cases and preventing future disappearances. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Rowe case is the possibility that similar environmental conditions continue to exist at multiple locations across the United States. Industrial activities, mining operations, and natural geological formations have created sites where electromagnetic anomalies could potentially influence human behavior in ways that increase the risk of disappearances or dangerous decision-making. Recent investigations of historical disappearance sites have revealed that many unsolved missing persons cases from the 19th and early 20th centuries occurred in areas with geological characteristics similar to the Rowe property. These discoveries suggest that environmental factors may have been responsible for more mysterious disappearances than previously recognized. Dr. Antonio Rodriguez of the Institute for Environmental Psychology, who studies the relationship between geology and human behavior, estimates that environmental influences may have contributed to hundreds of unexplained disappearances throughout American history. The Rowe case was probably not unique, just uniquely well documented, Dr. Rodriguez suggested in his 2019 analysis. Similar environmental conditions exist at numerous locations where unexplained disappearances have occurred. The suppression of information about these cases prevented recognition of patterns that could have led to earlier understanding of how geological factors can influence human behavior. The legacy of the Rowe family extends beyond their individual tragedy to encompass broader questions about environmental influences on human consciousness, the reliability of historical records, and the potential for natural phenomena to create conditions that appear supernatural but actually follow scientific principles. Modern efforts to understand and prevent environmentally influenced disappearances continue to reference the Rowe case as a crucial example of how geological factors can affect human psychology and decision-making. The detailed documentation maintained by Captain Morrison provides insights into environmental psychology that remain relevant for contemporary research. The story of the Rowe family also serves as a warning about the potential for environmental factors to influence human behavior in ways that exceed our current understanding of consciousness and free will. Their systematic preparation for departure suggests that they may have been acting under the influence of environmental factors that altered their perception of reality and their ability to make rational decisions. Whether the Rowe family's disappearance was caused by environmental influences, supernatural forces, or human agency remains debatable, but their case provides important insights into how natural phenomena can create conditions that challenge our understanding of missing persons investigations and the factors that influence human behavior. Current research into the Rowe phenomenon focuses on understanding the specific mechanisms by which electromagnetic fields and geological formations can affect human consciousness, and identifying environmental factors that might increase the risk of similar disappearances in contemporary settings. The rural Arkansas bottomland, where the Rowe family lived and disappeared, has remained largely uninhabited since 1859, with local residents continuing to avoid the area due to its reputation and reports of ongoing unusual phenomena. The property is currently owned by the state of Arkansas and managed as part of a wildlife preserve, though access is restricted due to safety concerns related to unstable geological conditions. But the questions raised by the Rowe family's impossible disappearance continue to influence research into missing persons cases, environmental psychology, and the relationship between human consciousness and natural phenomena. Their case challenges us to consider whether our current understanding of human behavior is complete enough to explain all disappearances that appear mysterious or supernatural. The scientific community continues to study the Rowe case, not only for its historical significance, but also for its potential relevance to contemporary missing persons investigations. As our understanding of environmental influences on human behavior continues developing, the Rowe family's experience may provide crucial insights into factors that affect decision-making and risk assessment in dangerous situations. The Rowe family's disappearance reminds us that the natural world contains forces capable of influencing human consciousness in ways that seem supernatural, but actually represent complex interactions between environmental factors and neurological function. Their tragic experience serves as both a historical mystery and a scientific puzzle that continues challenging our understanding of what it means to be human in relationship to the natural environment. Today, environmental monitoring systems and increased understanding of electromagnetic effects help protect people from the kind of extreme environmental influences that may have affected the Rowe family. But their case serves as a permanent reminder that environmental factors can influence human behavior in ways that exceed our ability to predict or control, and that some mysteries may never be completely solved despite advances in scientific understanding. The investigation files from the Rowe case remain partially classified, with some documents still sealed by Arkansas state authorities who continue to consider the information too sensitive for public disclosure. But the portions that have been released provide enough evidence to establish their disappearance as one of the most thoroughly documented and scientifically significant missing persons cases in American history. What do you think about the possibility that environmental factors could cause an entire family to disappear under such mysterious circumstances? factors. Have you ever experienced areas where the atmosphere felt wrong, or where compasses and electronic equipment malfunctioned? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know if your area has any history of unexplained disappearances that might be related to environmental factors. If you found this exploration of America's most disturbing curse of sudden disappearance compelling, subscribe for more investigations into the hidden environmental and psychological factors that have shaped mysterious events throughout our history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that reveal the scientific explanations behind seemingly supernatural mysteries. Remember, the truth about missing persons cases may be more complex and more scientifically fascinating than official investigations acknowledge. The case of the Rowe family demonstrates that environmental factors can influence human behavior in ways that create genuine mysteries, and that understanding these influences may be crucial for solving cases that appear impossible or supernatural. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark secret hidden in America's environmental and psychological history.